Awesome. So we'll just get started. Here we go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me tonight. I am really excited to get into all of the information. It's going to be about 30 minutes of information, and you're here and in the right place if you are curious about how to heal your hormones without using pills. So for those of you who might have missed the live event, I will be sending out a recorded version of this talk. And if you are here in person, go ahead in the chat box, say hello and tell me where you're coming from, where you're logging in from. And then go ahead and also share in one sentence why you're here. It could be a question about your own health, about a diagnosis that you have been given, or any ideas. Some ideas that I have here for you are if you're struggling from PMS symptoms, thyroid disease, PCOS, any menopausal fatigue or menopause symptoms, mood imbalances, irritability, depression, anxiety, acne, and weight gain. So as you can tell, hormones do a lot for your body, and if any of these things are out of balance, they have a huge effect on the body, seeing as there's a long list of symptoms here. So thank you for joining in. Go ahead and in the chat box, just message me and tell me if any of these symptoms are symptoms that you are experiencing or have questions about. And I will be trying to answer these questions in today's talk. And if I don't, please make sure to join my future webinars, because I'm planning on making sure I can answer all of these questions in the future. So if I don't get to your question today, then just join me for future webinars. I'll probably get to it then. So first, I want to tell you guys a little bit about me. So my name is Natalie, and I'm a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm also certified in nutrition pathology and functional medicine. So basically what this means is that I know and understand how the body systems work together, and we, as functional medicine practitioners, we work with the body to support the body with nutrition and lifestyle changes in order to address symptoms. So how this is different from conventional medicine is that conventional doctors might look at a symptom and try to figure out just how to suppress the symptom or potentially manage the symptom without asking the question of why. Why does a symptom present? Because it's there for a reason. And so I also want to share some information about my story. So I'm here and passionate about nutritional changes because I studied physics in undergrad, so I just have always had an intrigue for systems and scientific understanding and research. And I also have had personal hormone imbalances. From like a very young age, just starting out with when I first started my period, I had terrible cramps, and almost to the point where I was like passing out. So I had, I remember a clear story of me ending up in the nursing room at high school with like ghostly white, and I had to get picked up, and even Advil wouldn't work. So I've had a lot of pain, a lot of cystic acne, fatigue, mood imbalances, and a lot of our hormones have a huge effect on our neurotransmitters and balancing those. So all of that has to do with hormone balance. And so I've come a long way. I ended up seeing a nutritionist and learning more and studying more about this functional approach to our health, and want to share that with you, as I've been sharing it with many, many other people over the last 3 years as a nutritionist. I've helped people with thyroid and menopause and acne and other hormonal imbalances by just focusing on one thing. So that's what I'm excited to share with you guys today, is that one thing to help you. And what you're going to also learn is the link between gut health and your hormones, why conventional medicine won't heal your hormones, and what this number one thing is that you can always come back to help give your complex hormone system balance. So here it is. Here's the link between digestion and healthy digestion, gut health, and your hormones. So you might not have any gastrointestinal symptoms as we speak, or maybe never in your life, but that does not mean that you might potentially have your digestion is impaired, and that is affecting your endocrine system. And that's because of a couple things. So hormones are made of stuff that we eat. So if we're not properly absorbing the things that we eat, like proteins and amines and cholesterol, that is going to affect the production of hormones in the body. So first and foremost, we have to make sure our digestion is effective. Second is that hormones are regulated by our main detoxification pathway, which is the GI system, which includes the liver and gallbladder. And when that's impaired, it actually puts a burden on your urinary tract. And your urinary tract is another option for detoxification. And so if you've ever had UTIs or issues with infections, bladder infections, things like that, that is probably because you have issues with the gut and detoxification, and that's gumming up the urinary detoxification pathway. So how do we actually get poor digestion? How does this happen, and what does that look like? If you don't actually have symptoms, maybe you do have symptoms, then you would maybe get it. But if you don't, this is how it breaks down. So our digestion is broken when we have something called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is an imbalance of gut bacteria, and it can look like a couple of these options. It could be a combination of these things, or it could just be one. But you can have loss of beneficial bacteria, overgrowth of potentially pathogenic bacteria, loss of overall bacterial diversity. So any of those things can affect your microbiome, and it actually leads to something called leaky gut. So leaky gut is known as intestinal permeability in the literature. And this is actually studied, like there are studies on this, and it's never talked about in the medical field. But what happens is when we have this ecosystem is imbalanced in the gut, we start to get holes in our intestinal wall, and it allows for inflammation to build up in the body. So just putting it simply, this connection here is that our hormones are dependent on this digestive system and that proper gut bacterial balance. So this ecosystem is really affecting the hormones, and gastrointestinal imbalances can hinder the elimination of hormones. And then it also alters the proper production of hormones. So those are key things to know. And if you don't believe me still, there are some really cool studies that actually spell it out very clearly. So this research article has shown that hormones are regulated by an enzyme produced by specific gut bacteria. And when this process is impaired through dysbiosis of gut microbiota, characterized by low microbial diversity, then we get an imbalance of circulating estrogens in the body. And this can lead to obesity, metabolic syndrome, cancer, PCOS, and even cardiovascular disease and cognitive function. So there's this two-way street between the gut bacteria and estrogen balance. And if we support the gut, we can actually influence our hormones. And then we also see it in this other study. So it's not just with estrogen, there's a lot of other studies, but this is a specific study that shows how bacteria can affect the HPA axis, and that is our stress response system. So that's going to be how, depending on your gut bacteria, how well can you manage every day to, some day-to-day stress in your life. In this modern life, we are kind of just bombarded by stress. And so this can have a huge effect. It's, again, a two-way street. So all of that stress can have a huge effect on our gut bacteria. And then vice versa, if we can influence the gut bacteria with nutrition and lifestyle, that can actually improve our stress response. So here's the scenario. So say you have a gut infection in your GI tract. This actually will cause chronic stress, and that chronic stress is going to increase this hormone, this specific stress hormone called cortisol. And that cortisol, that's when it's really, really high for a long period of time, it can suppress the immune system. So you can have this festering of the gut infection even more, allowing more and more chronic cortisol. And actually, when cortisol is so high, we actually get it's an antagonist to insulin. So insulin is a hormone that helps us balance our blood sugar. And when our blood sugar is out of balance, then that's going to gum up all of the other hormonal systems. So we get something called hormonal resistance, because the hormone actually has to connect to the hormone receptor. And when there's a lot of blood sugar imbalances, there's a lot of sugar that gets stuck on those hormonal receptor sites, then the fit is not good. So basically, this just ends up with a broken feedback system, and that's why your hormones get all messed up. So it's unfortunate, but that's also why conventional medicine won't work, or didn't work for you, or it won't work for you. You can find some doctors who will work with you if you tell them to test certain tests, but some just don't know these kinds of things. So unless they're like a functional medicine doctor, potentially. But insulin resistance, they maybe never checked your insulin. Gut infections, they maybe never have checked, done a stool test. And there are different types of stool tests that a medical doctor is aware of versus a functional test. And then lastly, they potentially focused on just correcting a single hormone. And what this does, maybe they've just tried to replace a hormone, but it doesn't fix the root issue. It's just continuing to, again, create this hormonal resistance because there's excess hormones that your body's been given now that it has to deal with. So the number one thing that you can do is healing your gut. And this sounds pretty easy, maybe, or maybe it's really confusing to you. That's okay. But I'm going to break it down with you tonight on just kind of the main steps that you can start to take to help heal your gut. And it is not that hard. It's actually very, and it's also a lot of foods that you can really enjoy. So here are the basics for a nutrition protocol to heal your gut. So I'm always talking about nutrition density. So nutritional density refers to thinking about food in terms of the other benefits that it provides besides calories. So the vitamin and nutrient content compared to the calories that it provides would make it a more nutrient dense food. So in a lot of ways, the carbohydrates that we want to get that are nutrient dense are really just the colors. And you can tell the difference between these white, pale, gray kind of colors. Those foods actually have less nutrients per calorie versus a lot of these vibrant colored vegetables and fruits. Nuts and seeds are actually very nutrient dense because they contain a lot less carbohydrates, which actually tag on a lot of, with insulin resistance, if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, you're going to end up craving more carbohydrates. So we want to actually balance that with more protein. And so whole grains and whole legumes are actually a very important food to continue to have in your diet once you have already healed your gut. So for a temporary period of time, those aren't emphasized and they're actually avoided until you can handle them, or until you get to a point where your insulin is low enough, your cortisol levels are balanced, and your hormones are balanced. Then you can start to bring in these grains and legumes and feed more beneficial bacteria. So, second, thinking about nutrient dense proteins, there's a big conversation around with how much is important, how important is it to have protein in your diet? For healing the leaky gut, it's actually essential to have animal protein. And the reason is because animal protein is much more bioavailable with the amino acids that we need to help rebuild the cells of our intestinal wall. So I used to be vegetarian for a long time. I chose that because of the environmental impact. I did not want to partake in buying from conventional meat products. And I still, to this day, do not do that because of the effects not only on our planet, but also the negative effects of that animal is not healthy or living a proper life. And that's actually not going to provide me with a lot of health. A lot of animal protein from those types of mass produced factory farms, like they are going to have a higher incidences of toxins and antibiotics that are going to affect your microbiota. So I definitely would recommend to avoid those. And so getting a source of a really nutrient dense, sustainably raised animal protein is a great way for us to get these bioavailable proteins in the diet. And I actually recommend that we, again, at some point, grains and legumes have some protein, and but the nutrient density of them is far less than these animal proteins. So that's why we would avoid grains and legumes versus some of these animal proteins, because of how they are going to affect the gut microbiome, your insulin, your cortisol. And so temporarily at some point, I say people can bring those in, but not while we're trying to heal the gut. So lastly, nutrient dense fats and oils. So these we want to be very, very cautious of fats and oils in the diet, especially in the United States. We have an overconsumption of seed oils. Seed oils are things like sunflower oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, even grain oils like corn oil or rice oil are very, very toxic just from the processing, because this small little grain or seed or nut has to go through high temperatures, which actually rancidifies the oil in that whole process of being made. So what that does is actually it hijacks your mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of every cell in your body. It hijacks that, and it actually can change gene expression and increase fat accumulation and reduce your metabolism. So it's kind of one of the biggest things that I tell my clients is to get those seed oils out of the diet. Unfortunately, we've been told that saturated fats and animal fats are bad for us, but it's actually quite the opposite. Over the last 50 years, animal fats have been consumed less, and we've been consuming more of these seed oils, and the rates of obesity have increased. So it's not the saturated fats that cause obesity, it's the seed oils that actually are affecting our mitochondria and our whole metabolism. So I do recommend, 100% grass-fed animal fats or pasture-raised eggs. Don't take the skin off of the chicken. Organic coconut oil is good, and olive oil is especially good for insulin sensitivity and microbial health. So another thing that I'm always talking about with gut health is increasing the diversity. So most people today in the United States get their calories, 60% of their calories. So the majority of their calories come from corn, soy and wheat. And so those are just three foods that are the majority of our diet. In the human microbiome study, the United States scored the worst in gut bacterial diversity. So what we can see is that plant diversity in our diet on a weekly basis is very directly associated with an increase of bacterial diversity in our microbiome. And so what this does is, again, in the research articles before, when we have increased diversity in our microbiome, is that actually indicated better regulation of hormones and increased enzyme production with the clearance of hormones. So all of that is so important, especially plant diversity. And then I've kind of talked a lot about this in the protein section, which is very important, but I always encourage my clients to think more sustainably when we're thinking about nutrient density. So a vegetable picked and shipped from Mexico to your grocery store is going to have a lot less nutrient value than what's been picked in your backyard or even locally from like a farmer. And so there's a lot of benefits to supporting local sustainable farms as well, not just with your own health, but environmentally. So a lot of the issues with our own microbiomes is kind of, I see it as a mirror to the soil health of the earth, right? So with monocrop agricultural production, we are actually seeing a loss of bacterial diversity in the soil. And I think that is a direct kind of mirror to what we're seeing. I see all the time with my clients is, a lack of diversity in our gut bacteria. And that's a generational issue because we get our bacterial microbiome from our parents and they get it from their parents. And we are the third generation that's grown up on conventional processed industrial food. And that's actually having a huge effect more so on us and future generations rather than our parents and our grandparents. So all of that kind of plays a huge part in why we have to really look at what are these convenience foods that we've grown up with that we need to avoid. How do we avoid them? Here's an interesting statistic. So the average American consumes 10 pounds of chemical additives every year. And this has a devastating effect on our health. Unfortunately, the FDA only tests for single additives, and they don't have any idea how these additives are all interacting in our own body. So I not only walk my clients through kind of the sugar toxic ingredients and how to avoid those, but also the products that we use on our face and our cleaning products, the soaps that we use, all of that. There's a lot of research that actually has shown that these toxins and chemicals are endocrine disruptors. So they alone are getting into our body, and we're in just 30 seconds of being applied to our skin. And that has a huge effect on our hormone balance. So this is just a basic list of some of those industrialized, processed, highly processed ingredients to look out for, as well as these are all the different ways that sugar can be labeled, and unfortunately it gets hidden in a lot of processed food, and even organic food will have a lot of these ingredients that you should avoid. But in my own experience, honestly, with nutritional changes, I've found that it's most helpful for me and my clients to focus on what to eat to heal the gut and not necessarily what not to eat. And I pass this on by talking about kind of the four cornerstones of gut healing. And these, when you start to incorporate these, and you can do one at a time, and you might already be doing some of these, but when you start to incorporate these as a daily routine, it actually makes it more more easy for you to avoid the foods that are highly processed sugar and grains. One of the biggest things is meat stock, and there's actually a difference between meat stock versus bone broth. And the main difference is that meat stock is cooked for a shorter period of time versus bone broth, which is cooked for a much longer period of time. And you actually want more meat stock because there's more arginine, proline, and glycine, which are just proteins. They're amino acids that are highly, highly used by the body in order, especially like in order to heal the lining of the intestines. When we have leaky gut, our need for those specific amino acids increases, and there's no other way to get those than from meat stock. Bone broth has some of them, but a lot less. And so I tell my clients, you can start with bone broth because you can purchase bone broth, but at some point you definitely need to learn how to make your own meat stock. I have recipes on my blog, and I'll tell you about some recipe guides that I have too to look out for. So second are fermented foods, and some people ask what these are. So for gut healing, we definitely want to focus on lacto-fermented vegetables. So those are things like sauerkraut, kimchi, beet kvass. You can pickle your own vegetables and make your own kind of pickled vegetables of any kind, cauliflower, carrots and green beans, garlic. You can do any of those. And all of those are very, very nutrient dense and contain bacteria and enzymes that are going to help repopulate and increase the diversity of your gut microbiome. So those are probably one of the most important steps to having those in your diet for healing the gut. You can also, at some stages of gut healing, you can utilize raw, organic, fermented like yogurt or kefir, but only from really good quality dairy. Otherwise, I don't recommend most people to have dairy from the grocery store. Unfortunately, it's just not a good quality, and it's processed, meaning it's been pasteurized, which means that it's denatured, or it's been flash fermented, which means that it doesn't have quite as much bacterial benefit to compared to like a homemade yogurt from a raw milk source. And then third cornerstone is non-starchy vegetables. And these non-starchy vegetables are emphasized, right? So we want to emphasize the less starchy vegetables because the starches will actually continue to potentially increase your insulin, which is not good for the gut bacteria because that will dampen and suppress your immune system. But we also don't want the starches because they'll potentially feed any opportunistic bacteria. So those are pathogens that are causing that gut infection in the first place. So when people start to wean themselves off of these non-starchy or of these starchier foods, there's sometimes a detox reaction. You might crave them a lot more. And a really great way to get through that is mixing coconut oil or ghee with honey and eating that periodically whenever you get that sugar craving. So mixing the honey with the fat will actually provide more satiety, and you'll be able to not have as much of the starchier foods. And that is, again, for a temporary period of time, because we ultimately want diversity of the plant foods in our diet. And so if they're well tolerated, you can continue to eat them. Fourth, and the most difficult to incorporate, are organ meats. So organ meats are highly, highly nutritious. They're considered superfoods in my world and many other nutritionists and functional medicine doctors. It's well established that liver and organ meats have the highest content of vitamins and nutrients compared to the calories that it offers. So, and not to say that when you eat these foods, you're going to be hungry, because if you are focused on weight, if weight gain is an issue for you, what we want the body to actually get into is a metabolic flexible state. So what that means is you're able to burn your own stored fat versus constantly being dependent on the sugar and carbohydrates that you might be eating. And when we get into a dependency on sugar and carbohydrates, the body actually loses its ability to, but not forever, because you can get back into it, but it actually loses the ability to get out, to use that stored fat as energy. So you have lots of energy, and it's not always about getting the right amount of calories per se. And all of this has been very, very helpful for me in my health. And I learned many of this from the GAPS diet principles. So the GAPS diet is developed by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and she is just a wealth of information. She has a couple books out if you want to read those, but I talk about it on my website too. So I wanted to share with you guys just some of these resources for you that you can take a look at. We have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to post in the chat some links to my gut healing recipe guide, which is a specific protocol to heal the gut in 30 days. So it walks you through that actual step-by-step process. And it includes over 85 recipes for healing, as well as shopping lists and approved food lists and tips and recipes on how to tastefully incorporate these 4 cornerstones to gut healing. And then I also have what I know that making these changes on your own can be really challenging. And I see clients one-on-one virtually, and I give all of my clients my gut healing recipe guide. So I also do a thorough nutrition assessment and have more individualized recommendations and support for those one-on-one clients. So I will post those links in the chat for you to take a look at. And thank you so much for joining me. I'm looking forward to doing more of these webinars, so please stay tuned for any webinars. And if you have any questions here at this time, you can post those so that I can know how to answer those in the future webinars. I don't think I have time to answer them today, but many of you, again, are potentially suffering from, mood issues, acne, and weight gain, and hormone imbalances. And I've been there, and I know the steps that it takes can be challenging. And so I personally have found it so beneficial to go to someone, to have them keep me accountable and really walk me through and help me know that I'm not doing this alone. So you guys aren't alone, and I'm here for you if you need to email me also.